We're at the Congressional Black Caucus Conference here in Washington, D.C. with Achebe Toldson, the author of Black Sheep. Could you tell us what Black Sheep is about?
Black Sheep is a novel that looks at experiences of young black men in the United States. I'm currently a professor at Howard University, and prior to taking that academic position, I work with black men in a lot of settings, including the juvenile justice setting, the federal penitentiary, and the community-based mental health centers. I had done some research with looking at black men, and I published some articles in trade journals, but I really wanted to write a book that captured the heart and soul of the predicament that black men are experiencing in the United States right now. So what I did was I wrote Black Sheep in order to weave together the stories of different black men from different walks of life, and just to give the reader a sense of the journey of healing, resilience, and tragedy that a lot of black men experience in the United States.
Why would you decide to use fiction as your format?
That's a question that I get quite a bit. I've been writing creatively for a while. One of my hobbies is short stories, poetry, and being involved in the hip-hop community, spoken word poetry, and just the literary arts in general, there was a way that I could infuse my passion for the topic a little bit better in fiction than in nonfiction. I'm comfortable writing nonfiction, but when I write fiction, there's a little bit more of my heart that can come out in it, a little bit more creativity can come out in it, and it helps me to connect to an audience that I may not be privy to in just the academic nonfiction world.
What are some of the problems, what are some examples of some of the problems that you write about?
There are certain policies that we have in the United States that need to be examined very closely. One is a lot of our drug policies. When I worked in the federal penitentiary, one thing that I noticed was there was a lot of men who looked like me in there. I worked on a psychology staff where I was one of only two black psychologists and the only male psychologist, and also the youngest one. And one thing I noticed about the relationship between me and the inmates, and the relationship between a lot of my white counterparts and the inmates, is it just seemed like they were a whole lot different than them, even among the white inmates and the white psychologists. The black inmates and me, the black psychologist, I was finding that we had common friends, common experiences, that some of them hung out with people who was my classmates now, and it kind of shook me. And when I examined the role of a lot of the drug policies, such as the powder versus crack cocaine laws, a lot of the conspiracy possession with intent to distribute, which has a low threshold of evidence required to put someone in jail for 25 years, I realized that with a lot of black men in certain communities, it's just really easy to get caught up in that system. And so in the 80s, when a lot of these laws were first implemented, there was about 3 black men in college to every black man in prison. Fast forward to about the 2000s, when the policies had really become ingrained, we had more black men in prison than in college. And so these are some of the things that I look at, some unique experiences of black men in relation to some of the policies that exist.
What kind of policies would you advocate that could help reverse that ratio again, so there are more black men in college?
Okay. Policies that I examine very closely are drug policies and educational policies. As far as drug policies are concerned, the crack versus powder cocaine ratio, the 10-to-1 ratio, where you have to have 10 times the amount of crack cocaine as powder cocaine, I would reverse that. I would follow the recommendations of the Sentencing Commission, which was a nonpartisan commission that recommended to Congress back in the 1990s that there's really no scientific reason or justification for this difference in sentencing. I would also look at some of these conspiracy possession laws that has effectively made the non-violent inmate population more than the violent inmate population, particularly in federal prisons. These conspiracy possession to intent laws, conspiracy possession with intent to distribute laws, a lot of times in certain communities you have some black men who, or some men in general, who are fresh out of high school. They organize with each other to sell drugs. A lot of them have been in drug families, and these are some of the stories that I heard. They grew up in drug families. They started cooking crack cocaine when they were 18 years old, or not 18 years old, when they were 8 years old. Follow the life in their family, and then when they first get out of high school, 18 years old, they're organizing with some of their friends. They really haven't been taught any good morals and values. But just because they organize with their friends to sell as opposed to selling it on their own, they're getting 25 years in federal penitentiary. 25 years is just a very long time. I found it very suspicious when I worked in the federal penitentiary that some of the men who I found to be dangerous, who I would be afraid to let out in society, had less jail time than some guys who didn't have any violence on their chart whatsoever. And so I think when you have this, I mean, we want a criminal justice system that's going to protect us from the most dangerous criminals. But with a lot of the drug laws that we have in place, we're giving we're giving non-violent inmates a lot more time than we're giving violent inmates.
What was that? How long were you there, and what was that experience like?
That was a very interesting experience. My office was right here. Inmate cell was right next door to it. I had inmates stopping in all of the time just to talk. There was open access to me and the inmates. I did anger management groups. I did other types of psychotherapy groups, and did individual counseling, forensic assessment, dangerousness assessment, suicide risk assessment. I got a lot of good stories coming out of that experience. One of the stories I have, which kind of leads into one of the reasons I wrote the book, is I had an inmate who came into my office, and I had been seeing him around the halls a lot. He liked to work out, so he would be doing push-ups on the steps and all that kind of stuff. And one time he kind of stormed into my office and just sat at my desk. This is my first time talking to him. He stormed into my office, just sat at my desk, or sat before my desk, and he says, "You know, I see you walking around here with your suit on. You're looking like you're doing something with yourself. And, you know, when I was growing up, I just never seen anybody like you. You know, I ain't never seen nobody, you know, young black man wearing the suit, going to work every day, doing something positive with his life. And, you know, what I just really came here to tell you is talk to the kids." And then he just walked out. And then that talk to the kids line just kind of rang over my head a lot. And, you know, it helped me to realize, you know, I mean, among other things, it helped me to realize that a lot of young kids, particularly poor black kids in poor communities, don't get exposed to a lot of positive black role models. And just like in his experiences, what he saw in his neighborhood were drug dealers. They were the only ones who had money. If he was walking around the neighborhood with a hole in the shoe, it was the drug dealers who was throwing $50 at him to get a new pair of shoes. It wasn't professionals like me. And so that experience was kind of heavy on me. And after I left the prison, I became the clinical director of a group home. And this was a group home for young adolescents who were in state custody. A lot of them have been diagnosed with behavior problems, and a lot of them came from, or all of them really came from very harsh circumstances where they had parents who abused drugs, fathers that abandoned them. And so I had 8 kids who I was the clinical director of. I was in charge of all their clinical services.